The scream tore through the great hall before anyone could stop it. Elena hit the stone floor hard, her palms scraping against the cold surface as the entire pack turned to watch. The candles along the walls flickered as if even the flames wanted to look away. She pressed a hand to her cheek where Damon's mark still burned red, the sting sharper than anything she had felt in her 22 years of life. "I reject you, Elena of the Ashwood Pack," Damon said, his voice carrying to every corner of the hall. "You are weak. Your wolf is weak. I will not have a mate who cannot even hold her shift under pressure." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Somewhere near the back, a woman laughed behind her hand. Elena searched the faces around her, hoping to find even one that held sympathy, but she found only curiosity, the kind reserved for watching something break. She had known this moment might come. She had felt it building for months, in the way Damon's eyes slid past her at packed dinners, in the way his friends stopped greeting her by name. But knowing a storm is coming and standing in it are two very different things. "Damon, please," she whispered, though she hated herself for it, the moment the words left her mouth. Begging would not change anything, it never did. He did not even look at her again. He turned to the pack elders standing near the raised platform at the front of the hall, straightened his jacket, and asked when the next candidate for his mate bond would be presented. As if she were a task crossed off a list, as if 5 years of promises meant nothing at all. Elena rose to her feet slowly, her legs shaking beneath her. The rejection bond snapped somewhere deep in her chest, a physical thing, like a rope pulled too tight and then cut. She staggered, caught herself on a nearby pillar, and forced her spine straight. She would not fall again. Not here. Not in front of them. The Alpha of Ashwood Pack, Damon's father, watched from his seat with an unreadable expression. He had never liked her much either, not since the day she was born an Omega instead of the strong Beta everyone had expected from her parents. Omegas were tolerated in Ashwood. Barely. They served, they worked, they stayed quiet, and they were never, ever supposed to expect more than that. "Take her belongings to the outer cabins," the Alpha said, waving a hand, as if brushing away a fly. "She no longer has a place inside the pack walls." 2 guards stepped forward. Elena did not wait for them to touch her. She walked out of the great hall on her own, chin lifted, though every step felt like walking across broken glass. Behind her, she heard the pack already moving on, voices rising in conversation about the upcoming visit from the Alpha King, about how important it was for Ashwood to look strong and worthy in front of him. Nobody spoke of her again once the doors closed. Outside, the night air hit her face like a slap, cold and sharp, carrying the scent of pine and distant rain. Elena stood on the stone steps of the hall and let herself breathe for the first time since Damon's mark had touched her skin. Her wolf whimpered inside her, small and bruised, curling into the farthest corner of her mind. She had never had a strong shift, not compared to the others in her age group. Her wolf came slower, quieter, more careful. The pack had mocked her for it since she was young. Damon had promised, once, that he did not care about any of that. Promises meant very little in Ashwood, it seemed. She walked the long path toward the outer cabins alone, her arms wrapped around herself against the cold. The forest pressed close on either side of the trail, tall pines swaying gently, their needles whispering overhead. She had always found comfort in the woods, more comfort than she ever found among her own kind. Trees did not reject you. Trees did not laugh behind their hands. The cabin assigned to her was small, half-rotted at the edges, clearly meant for the lowest-ranking members of the pack, who had nowhere else to go. A single room with a narrow bed, a stove that barely worked, and a window with a crack running down one corner. Elena pushed the door open and stepped inside, and only then, alone, with no one watching, did she let herself cry. She cried until her throat ached and her eyes burned, curled on the thin mattress with her knees pulled to her chest. She cried for the years she had given Damon, for the future she had imagined with him, for the family who had stopped speaking to her the moment she was marked as unworthy. She cried because there was no one left to tell. When the tears finally stopped, something else took their place. It was quiet at first, barely a whisper in her chest, but it grew steadier with every breath. It was not hope, not exactly. It was something more stubborn than hope. It was the simple decision to keep breathing anyway. Elena wiped her face with the back of her hand and looked around the small cabin that was now for better or worse, entirely her own. No one to answer to, no one to disappoint, no one to reject her again, because there was no one left with the power to do it. Over the following days, she learned the shape of her new life. She woke before dawn, when the frost still clung to the grass, and walked to the small stream a mile from her cabin, to gather water, since the pipes in the outer cabins rarely worked. She foraged for mushrooms and berries in the deeper parts of the forest, careful to avoid the areas closer to packland where she might run into someone from her old life. She mended her own clothes with a needle she found in a drawer left behind by whoever had lived in the cabin before her. The pack did not check on her. No one brought food or firewood the way they were supposed to for every member, even the lowest ranked. Elena suspected this was intentional, a quiet punishment disguised as an oversight. She did not complain. Complaining had never gotten her anywhere in Ashwood, and she doubted it would start now. What surprised her most was how the silence did not feel as heavy as she expected. There was a strange kind of peace in being forgotten. No eyes watching her every move, judging the strength of her shift or the volume of her voice. No Damon reminding her, in small careless ways, that she would never quite be enough. Just the forest, the stream, and her own steady heartbeat. On the third day, while gathering firewood near the edge of pack territory, she heard two guards talking near the border fence. She slowed her steps, staying hidden behind a wide oak, more out of habit than any real interest in pack matters that no longer concerned her. "The Alpha King's convoy arrives within the month," one guard said, his voice low but carrying in the still air. "Word is he inspects every pack under his crown personally now, ever since the trouble in the Northern Territories last year. They say he does not tolerate weakness," the second guard replied. "If Ashwood does not look strong, the Alpha could lose more than face. He could lose his title." Elena had heard whispers of the Alpha King before, the way most in the lower ranks of any pack had heard of him, as a distant and powerful figure whose name carried weight even among Alphas. Cale Ashbourne ruled over every pack in the region, the strongest wolf born in a generation, feared and respected in equal measure. She had never expected to think of him again once she left the Great Hall behind. He belonged to a world of politics and pack standing that no longer had anything to do with her. She continued gathering firewood, filing the conversation away as nothing more than distant news, the kind of thing that happened to other people, in other lives. The days blurred together after that. Elena found a strange rhythm in her solitude, waking with the sun, working with her hands, falling asleep exhausted enough that her mind had little room left to dwell on Damon's voice, echoing rejection across the great hall. Her wolf remained quiet most days, still healing from the sharp cut of the bond breaking, but she felt it stir sometimes at dusk, when the light turned gold and the forest grew soft and still. She began speaking to it gently, the way she might speak to a frightened animal. "You are not weak," she told it, even when she did not fully believe the words herself. "We are still here. We are still breathing." One evening, nearly 2 weeks after her rejection, Elena sat outside her cabin, watching the sun sink behind the tree line. The air had grown warmer that week, carrying the scent of early blooming flowers from somewhere deeper in the woods. She had grown thinner, her clothes hanging looser on her frame than they used to, but there was a steadiness in her now that had not been there before, a quiet resolve, forged in the loneliness of the outer cabins. She thought, briefly, of the Alpha King's coming visit, of the guard's nervous conversation about strength and weakness. She wondered, without much real curiosity, what kind of man ruled over so many packs, what it might be like to hold that much power and still, presumably, feel nothing at all for the Omegas, discarded at the edges of every territory he oversaw. She did not know then that within days her entire understanding of the world would be shattered again, this time not by rejection, but by fire. She did not know that the quiet, steady rhythm she had built for herself was about to be tested in a way that would either break her completely or reveal a strength she had never been allowed to discover. For now, she only watched the sun disappear behind the trees, pulled her thin blanket tighter around her shoulders, and allowed herself, for the first time since the Great Hall, to hope for something she could not yet name. The wind shifted that night, carrying a strange restlessness through the forest. Animals grew quiet earlier than usual. Even the crickets seemed to hold their breath. Elena noticed it as she prepared for bed, a prickling sensation along the back of her neck that her wolf recognized before her human mind could name it. Something was coming. She told herself it was nothing, exhaustion playing tricks on a mind already worn thin by grief and solitude. She pulled her blanket over her shoulders and closed her eyes, unaware that across the pack territory, in the nursery den nestled near the eastern wall, a single careless mistake was about to set an entire section of Ashwood ablaze. Unaware that her quiet, forgotten life at the edge of the pack was about to collide, in the most violent and unexpected way, with the fate of a king. Smoke curled through the trees before the first alarm bell rang. Elena woke with a start, her heart already pounding before her mind caught up to the danger. The smell hit her first, sharp and acrid, nothing like the wood smoke from evening cook fires that usually drifted through the outer cabins. This was different. This was wrong. She threw off her blanket and rushed to the window. Through the crack running down the glass, she saw it. A orange glow lighting the sky above the pack walls, far brighter than any lantern or fire pit had a right to be. Her stomach dropped. The nursery. That glow was coming from the direction of the nursery. Elena did not stop to think about her own safety, did not pause to remember that she no longer belonged to the pack that had cast her aside. Her feet were already moving, carrying her out of the cabin and down the dark path toward the pack walls before her mind fully understood what her body had already decided. The night air burned in her lungs as she ran. Branches scraped at her arms, and she could hear, faintly at first, and then louder, as she closed the distance, the sound of shouting voices and the crackle of flames eating through wood. By the time she reached the edge of pack territory, the fire had grown into something enormous, a wall of orange and red climbing high into the dark sky, sending sparks scattering like angry fireflies across the rooftops. Guards ran in every direction. Some carried buckets of water that seemed laughably small against the size of the blaze. Others shouted orders that contradicted each other, creating more chaos than order. Elena searched the frantic scene, looking for any sign of coordinated effort, and found none. The pack, so proud of its strength and discipline, had crumbled into panic the moment real danger arrived. "The main hall is safe," someone shouted. "Protect the main hall first. The Alpha King arrives within days. We cannot let him see damage to the hall." Elena felt something cold settle in her stomach at those words. They were prioritizing appearances over lives. She scanned the chaos again, and this time she noticed what no one else seemed to be paying attention to. The nursery den, tucked near the eastern wall, sat directly in the fire's path, and no one, not a single guard or warrior, was running toward it. Her wolf surged forward inside her, sharp and insistent, cutting through the fog of exhaustion and grief that had clung to her for weeks. She did not think about the danger. She did not think about her own weakness, the very thing Damon had rejected her for. She thought only of the pups who slept in that den every night, too young to shift, too small to run on their own. She sprinted toward the nursery, pushing past guards who barely spared her a glance, too consumed by their own panic to notice one Omega running the wrong direction. The heat grew unbearable as she approached, the roar of the flames swallowing every other sound. She could see now that part of the nursery roof had already caved in, thick black smoke pouring from the gaps. "Is anyone still inside?" she screamed at a passing guard, grabbing his arm. He shook her off, his eyes wide and unfocused with fear. "The caretaker got most of them out. I do not know about all of them. There is no time. The whole structure could come down any moment." Elena did not wait to hear more. She ran toward the den's entrance, where flames licked hungrily at the wooden frame. Through the smoke and heat, she thought she heard something, faint and desperate, a sound that made every instinct in her body scream with urgency. A pup was crying somewhere inside. She had heard that pack members were already writing off anyone left inside as lost, too dangerous to attempt a rescue with the fire spreading so fast. She had heard the fear in every voice around her, the resignation that came with watching something you could not control. But Elena had spent her entire life being told what she could not do. She had been told her wolf was too weak, her spirit too soft, her worth too small to matter to anyone. She had believed those words for years, had let them shape the quiet, apologetic way she moved through the world. Standing in front of that burning den, listening to a pup's frightened cries, she found she no longer cared what anyone believed she was capable of. She pulled the collar of her shirt up over her nose and mouth, took the deepest breath she could manage in air thick with smoke, and stepped through the burning doorway into the den. The heat inside was staggering, pressing against her skin like a physical weight. Smoke filled the small space, turning the air into a gray, choking soup that stung her eyes and made every breath feel like swallowing fire. She dropped low, remembering from somewhere, some half-forgotten lesson from her youth, that cleaner air lingered closer to the ground. "Hello?" she called out, her voice raw and cracking. "Is anyone here? Please answer me." The crying came again, closer now, from a corner of the den, where a section of the roof had partially collapsed, creating a small pocket beneath fallen beams. Elena crawled toward the sound, her palms scraping against splintered wood and hot embers, ignoring the pain that flared with every movement. She found the pup wedged beneath a fallen beam, small and gray-furred, trembling violently, its tiny paws scrabbling uselessly against the wood, pinning it in place. It could not have been more than a few weeks old, barely strong enough to shift back to human form even if it had known how. "I have you," Elena said, though her voice shook as badly as her hands. "I am not leaving you here." She threw her weight against the beam, straining with everything she had. Her Omega strength, the very trait that had earned her nothing but scorn her entire life, felt impossibly small against the weight of burning wood. For one terrifying moment, she thought she would fail, that she had run into a burning building only to discover, once again, that she simply was not strong enough. Then something shifted inside her, not physically, but somewhere deeper. She thought of every moment she had been told she could not, every door closed in her face, every whispered insult behind cupped hands. She thought of Damon's voice in the great hall, declaring her unworthy in front of everyone she had ever known. She pushed again, harder this time, a sound tearing from her throat that was half scream, half sob, and the beam shifted, just enough for her to pull the trembling pup free and press it against her chest, shielding it with her own body, as embers rained down around them. The roof groaned above her, a sound like the world itself splitting apart. Elena scrambled toward the doorway, the pup clutched tight against her, moving faster than she had ever moved in her life, faster than she thought her small body could carry her. Smoke clawed at her lungs, black spots dancing at the edges of her vision, but she kept moving, kept her legs pumping beneath her even as her strength began to fail. She burst through the doorway, just as the section of roof directly above the entrance gave way entirely, collapsing inward in a shower of sparks and burning debris. The force of it threw her forward, and she landed hard on the ground outside, curling instinctively around the pup in her arms to shield it from the impact. For a moment, everything went silent, the roar of the fire fading into a strange, distant hum. Elena felt her body screaming with pain, her skin blistered in places, her lungs burning with every ragged breath. But the pup in her arms was safe, trembling, terrified, but safe. She had done it. She had saved it. The thought carried her through the next several steps, staggering away from the burning den, toward the tree line, away from the chaos and shouting that still filled the pack grounds behind her. Her vision blurred at the edges, colors bleeding together in strange, dizzying patterns. Her legs felt heavier with every step, as if the ground itself had turned to mud beneath her feet. She did not know how far she made it, before her body finally gave out. She only knew that one moment she was walking, the pup still cradled against her chest, and the next moment, the world tilted sideways, and the ground rushed up to meet her. She thought, in the last clear moment before darkness claimed her, that at least the pup would be found. Someone would come. Someone would see the small trembling creature, and understand that it needed help. She did not think anyone would notice her at all. The forest grew quiet around her fallen form, the distant glow of the fire painting flickering shadows across the grass. Somewhere above, through the smoke drifting past the treetops, the stars remained indifferent to the Omega who had given everything she had left to save a life that was not even her own. She did not see the second convoy of riders approaching from the northern road, arriving days ahead of schedule, drawn toward the unmistakable glow of fire against the night sky. She did not hear the powerful, commanding voice that would soon cut through the chaos of the burning pack grounds, demanding answers no one seemed prepared to give. She only knew darkness, and the faint, comforting weight of a small heartbeat still pressed against her own. Cale Ashbourne smelled the smoke 3 miles before his convoy reached the border of Ashwood territory. He had been riding ahead of schedule, eager to complete his inspection of the smaller packs before the harsher weather set in, when the wind shifted and carried the unmistakable scent of a structure fire mixed with something far more troubling, the panicked cries of an entire pack in crisis. His wolf rose immediately beneath his skin, sharp and alert, every instinct honed by years of leading armies and settling disputes across dozens of territories, screaming that something was very wrong. "Increase our pace," he ordered the 6 warriors riding with him, his voice carrying the kind of authority that needed no raising in volume to be obeyed instantly. "Something has happened at Ashwood." They crossed the remaining distance in minutes, the glow of fire visible above the tree line, long before they reached the actual walls. Cale had seen fires before, had commanded rescue efforts in territories devastated by careless accidents or deliberate sabotage, but the scale of chaos that greeted him as he crested the final hill still made his jaw tighten with barely contained fury. Half the eastern section of the pack grounds burned freely, guards running in circles with buckets far too small to matter. No clear chain of command directing the effort. This was not simply bad luck. This was the result of poor leadership, poor training, an entire pack that had grown so consumed with appearances that it had forgotten the basics of protecting its own people. Cale dismounted before his horse had fully stopped, striding into the chaos with a presence that made guards freeze mid-motion despite the danger around them. His voice cut through the noise like a blade. "Where is your alpha? Who is coordinating this response?" A guard, soot-streaked and wide-eyed, stumbled toward him. "Alpha King, we did not expect you until next week. We are still trying to contain the fire in the nursery section. Most of the pups were evacuated, but we are uncertain if all of them." "Uncertain," Cale repeated, his tone flat and dangerous. "You are uncertain whether children are still trapped inside a burning building, and instead of confirming that, you are standing here explaining the situation to me." The guard paled and stammered an apology before scrambling toward the nursery to check. Cale turned, scanning the grounds with the sharp, assessing eyes of a leader who had learned long ago that panic solved nothing, that order had to be imposed from somewhere, even when everyone around him had lost their heads. His warriors fell into formation instantly, moving to organize the scattered guards into an actual bucket line, redirecting effort toward containing the fire's spread rather than the useless chaos it had been. Cale himself moved toward the eastern wall, following the strongest pull of smoke and heat, some instinct in him insisting that the true danger, the true story of this night, lay in that direction rather than anywhere else. He found the nursery den largely collapsed, still smoldering, the worst of the flames finally beginning to die down as his warriors worked to smother them. A caretaker sat nearby, cradling 2 crying pups, her face streaked with soot and tears. "Are these all of them?" Cale asked, crouching beside her. The caretaker shook her head, her voice trembling. "There was one more. A newborn. Barely 3 weeks. I could not reach him in time. The smoke was too thick. I thought he was lost. I am so sorry. I tried." Someone went in after him. A nearby guard interrupted, jogging over with a torch in hand. "I saw a figure run into the den just before the roof came down the first time. I do not know who it was. Everything happened so fast." Cale straightened, his eyes narrowing, as he scanned the tree line beyond the nursery, following the same instinct that had guided him from the border. If someone had gone in after the pup and the roof had collapsed, there was a chance, however small, that they had not made it out in time. He moved without another word, breaking into a run toward the trees, his wolf pressing against his senses, sharpening his hearing and his sight in ways only the strongest alphas could summon at will. He caught it then, faint but unmistakable, the sound of a heartbeat, slow and labored, coming from somewhere in the grass near the edge of the forest. He found her collapsed at the base of an old oak tree, curled protectively around something small and gray-furred that whimpered weakly against her chest. Cale dropped to his knees beside her, and for one strange, suspended moment, the roar of the fire and the shouting behind him seemed to fade into complete silence. She was badly burned, her clothing scorched and torn, blisters forming along her arms where she had clearly shielded the pup from falling debris. Her face, visible beneath a layer of soot and ash, was pale, in a way that made his chest tighten with an urgency he did not fully understand. And yet, even unconscious, even dying, her arms remained locked around the small creature she had risked everything to save. Cale reached out to check her pulse, and the moment his fingers brushed her wrist, something inside him shifted violently. A recognition so powerful it nearly knocked the breath from his lungs. His wolf surged forward with a force he had not felt in years, howling somewhere deep in his chest, with a certainty that needed no further proof. Mate. The word echoed through him, impossible and undeniable all at once. He had waited decades for this moment, had begun to believe, as many powerful alphas eventually did, that his position and strength had somehow cost him the chance at finding a true bond. And now, here she was, a stranger he had never met, dying in his arms on the outskirts of a pack he had come to inspect for weakness. "Stay with me," Kale said, his voice rough with an emotion he rarely allowed himself to show in front of others. He gathered her carefully into his arms, mindful of her burns, the small pup still cradled against her chest, shifting to press closer to both of them, as if it understood, in whatever way pups understood such things, that safety had finally arrived. "Healers!" Kale roared, his voice carrying across the entire pack grounds, silencing every conversation and every frantic shout at once. "I need my healers here immediately." His warriors moved instantly, some breaking away to fetch the healers traveling with the convoy, others clearing a path through the chaos, as Kale carried Elena toward the relative safety of the open field, beyond the burning section of packland. He laid her down gently on a spread cloak, keeping the pup nestled against her side, and pressed 2 fingers to the pulse at her throat, counting the faint, uneven beats with a growing sense of dread. "Hold on," he murmured, low enough that only she might have heard it, had she been conscious. "You do not get to leave now, not when I have only just found you." The Ashwood Alpha arrived moments later, breathless and clearly startled, to find the Alpha King kneeling in the grass beside an unconscious Omega he did not immediately recognize. Kale looked up at him, and the fury that had been simmering since he first arrived finally broke free, cold and absolute. "Explain to me," Kale said, his voice deceptively calm in the way that experienced leaders knew to fear, far more than shouting, how a fire of this scale was allowed to spread through your pack grounds with no organized response. "Explain to me why a single Omega had to run into a burning building to save a child that your own guards abandoned." The Ashwood Alpha's mouth opened and closed several times, no answer forming that would satisfy the man kneeling before him. Kale did not wait for one. He turned his attention back to Elena, to the healers now rushing across the field toward them, and pushed every other concern from his mind, except the singular desperate need to keep her breathing until help arrived. He did not yet know her name. He did not know the story of her rejection, the humiliation she had endured in the very hall now standing scorched and half-ruined behind them. He knew only that fate had placed her in his path in the most dramatic and terrifying way imaginable, and that he had no intention of letting her slip away before he had the chance to understand why. The healers arrived and began working immediately, their hands moving with practiced urgency over her burns, checking her breathing, calling out instructions to one another in the clipped, efficient language of people trained to fight against death itself. Kale remained at her side through it all, refusing every suggestion that he step back and let them work unimpeded. "Her name," he said suddenly, looking up at the gathered Ashwood guards, with an intensity that made several of them flinch. "Someone tell me her name." A young guard, barely more than a boy, stepped forward hesitantly. "That is Elena, Alpha King. She was rejected by our future Alpha 2 weeks ago. She has been living alone in the outer cabins since then." Kale absorbed this information in silence, his jaw tightening as pieces began falling into place, painting a picture of neglect and cruelty that made his blood run cold. An Omega, cast aside and forgotten by her own pack, running toward danger that everyone else had fled from, saving a life that was not hers to save, while the people who should have protected her left her to die, alone in the grass. He looked down at her still, soot-streaked face, at the small pup that had not left her side, and made a silent vow that whatever happened next, whatever it took, this woman would never again be treated as though her life mattered less than anyone else's. The healers worked through the night, and Kale stayed beside her every moment, watching the rise and fall of her chest with a focus that bordered on desperation, praying to whatever gods watched over wolves that she would open her eyes before the sun rose over the ruined nursery den. The healers moved Elena to a private tent set up at the edge of the pack grounds, far from the smoke and ruin of the nursery den. Kale had ordered it erected himself, refusing to let her remain anywhere near the chaos still unfolding across Ashwood territory. His warriors worked through the night to help contain the last of the fire, while healers tended to the wounded, But Kale did not leave Elena's side for even a moment. He sat on a low stool beside her cot, watching healers apply salves to the burns along her arms and shoulders, listening to their murmured assessments with an intensity that made even the most experienced among them work with careful precision. The pup she had saved slept curled against her hip, refusing to be moved, despite several attempts by nursery staff to take him elsewhere for his own care. "His name is Finn," one of the healers offered quietly, noticing Kale's attention drift toward the small creature. "The caretaker told us. He is the youngest pup in the pack, born only 3 weeks ago. He would not have survived another few minutes in that fire." Kale nodded slowly, his eyes returning to Elena's still face. She knew that. She ran in anyway. "From what the guards described, she did not hesitate at all," the healer said. "Most warriors twice her size and strength would have thought twice before entering a structure already collapsing. She is fortunate to be alive." Fortunate felt like too small a word for what Kale was feeling, as he watched her chest rise and fall in shallow, uneven breaths. He had led warriors into battle, had watched strong wolves fall to injuries far less severe than the ones covering her small frame, and yet something about her stubborn will to survive, evident even in unconsciousness, filled him with a fierce and protective hope he had not expected to feel, so soon after finding his mate. Mate. The word still felt strange and enormous, settling into his chest like something too large to fully comprehend. He had spent decades ruling over dozens of packs, had faced down rival alphas and settled territorial disputes that could have ended in bloodshed, and none of it had prepared him for the quiet, overwhelming certainty that had struck him the moment his fingers brushed her wrist in the grass. He thought back to the guard's words, rejected 2 weeks ago, left to live alone in the outer cabins, with no support from her pack. The anger that thought stirred in him was different from the fury he had felt watching the disorganized chaos of the fire response. This was colder, sharper, the kind of anger that did not fade with time but settled into resolve. Whoever had rejected her would answer for it. Not tonight, not while she remained unconscious and fragile, but eventually, and thoroughly. Hours passed in the quiet rhythm of healers checking her vitals, changing bandages, murmuring soft reassurances to a patient who could not hear them. Kale remained a constant presence, occasionally stepping outside to receive updates from his warriors about the state of the pack grounds, but always returning within minutes, unable to stay away for long. Near dawn, one of the healers, an older woman named Grace, who had served the royal convoy for over 20 years, approached him with a careful expression. "Alpha King, may I speak plainly?" Kale nodded, his eyes not leaving Elena's face. "Her injuries are severe, but not beyond healing. The smoke inhalation was the greatest danger, and her lungs have already begun to clear, thanks to the herbs we administered. Her burns will scar in places, but she will recover full use of her body, given time and rest." Grace paused, choosing her next words carefully. "What concerns me more is what I sense beneath the physical wounds. This is a woman who has been carrying exhaustion and grief for far longer than tonight's events would explain." Kale's jaw tightened. She was rejected by her intended mate 2 weeks ago, abandoned by her pack shortly after. Grace's expression softened with understanding. "That explains a great deal. The body can heal from burns and smoke. The heart takes considerably longer, especially when the wounds run that deep." She studied him for a moment, something knowing in her gaze. "You have already recognized her as your mate, have you not?" Kale did not bother denying it. There was little point lying to a woman who had served him long enough to read him better than most. "The moment I touched her hand, then I would advise patience when she wakes," Grace said gently. "A woman who has just survived rejection and near death in the same fortnight will not easily trust in a bond, no matter how true it may be. Give her time to understand what has happened, to trust her own judgment again, before asking her to trust yours." Kale absorbed the advice in silence, though every instinct in him wanted nothing more than to declare the bond immediately, to surround her with every protection his position could offer the moment she opened her eyes. But he recognized the wisdom in Grace's words. He had watched enough young wolves rush into bonds, without proper care to know how quickly trust could crumble, when forced, rather than earned. He would wait. He would give her whatever time she needed. But he would not leave her alone again, not the way her pack had left her alone in those outer cabins while she survived on scraps of dignity and stubborn will. As the first light of dawn crept over the horizon, painting the sky in soft shades of pink and gold, Elena's eyelids began to flutter. Cale straightened immediately, leaning forward, every muscle in his body tensed with anticipation. Her eyes opened slowly, unfocused at first, taking in the unfamiliar tent, the healers moving quietly nearby, and finally, the imposing figure seated close beside her cot. Confusion flickered across her features, followed quickly by alarm as her body registered the pain radiating from her burns. "Easy," Cale said, his voice gentler than most who knew him would have believed possible. "You are safe. You are being cared for." Elena's gaze darted around the tent, taking in details with growing panic, before settling on the small gray pup still curled against her side. Relief washed over her features so visibly that Cale felt his own chest ease in response. "He is fine," Cale confirmed. "Because of you, you saved his life." "Where am I?" Elena's voice came out cracked and hoarse, her throat raw from smoke inhalation. "Who are you?" Cale hesitated, aware of Grace's advice to move carefully, to give her space before overwhelming her with the full weight of what had happened between them. "My name is Cale. I arrived at Ashwood shortly after the fire began. My healers have been caring for you through the night." Elena's brow furrowed as she tried to piece together fragments of memory, the smoke, the crying pup, the crushing weight of the beam, the desperate scramble toward the door before everything went dark. "The nursery," she said suddenly, struggling to sit up despite the healer's protests. "I need to know if everyone made it out." "Everyone is safe," Cale assured her, gently pressing a hand against her shoulder to keep her from straining her injuries further. "Because of your courage, every pup in that nursery survived the night." Elena stared at him, something complicated flickering across her expression, disbelief mixed with exhaustion so profound it seemed to reach all the way to her bones. She sank back against the cot, her eyes drifting closed again, though this time it seemed more from relief than unconsciousness. "Thank you," she whispered, so quietly Cale almost missed it, before sleep claimed her once more. Cale remained seated beside her, long after her breathing evened into the steady rhythm of true rest, studying the curve of her face, the stubborn set of her jaw, even in sleep. He thought of everything Grace had said, of the patience this fragile new bond would require, and found himself surprisingly at peace with the prospect. He had waited decades to find his mate. He could wait a little longer to properly earn her trust. Outside the tent, the sun continued its slow climb over the ruined edges of Ashwood territory, illuminating the scorched remains of the nursery den, the exhausted guards finally beginning to organize proper cleanup efforts, and the quiet, watchful presence of an Alpha King, who had arrived expecting to judge a pack's strength, and instead found something far more valuable hidden among its most forgotten members. By midday, word of the fire, and the mysterious Omega, who had saved a pup from certain death, had spread through every corner of Ashwood territory. Pack members who had never spared Elena a second glance now whispered her name with something close to awe, though Elena herself remained unaware of the shift, drifting in and out of healing sleep, inside the quiet tent at the edge of the grounds. Cale used the hours of her rest to address matters he could no longer ignore. He called the Ashwood Alpha, a broad-shouldered man named Victor who had grown visibly more nervous with each passing hour, to a private meeting inside the damaged Great Hall. Damon, the Alpha's son and the man responsible for Elena's rejection, stood beside his father, his expression carefully neutral, in a way that did nothing to hide the anxiety beneath. "I want a full accounting of what happened last night," Cale said, seating himself in the chair typically reserved for the Ashwood Alpha, a deliberate choice that was not lost on anyone in the room. "Every failure, every gap in your pack's response, and every reason your guards left an unprotected Omega to enter a burning building alone while trained warriors stood outside debating orders." Victor cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable. "Alpha King, the fire spread faster than anyone anticipated. Our guards did their best under difficult circumstances. Your guards prioritized protecting this hall over confirming whether children remained trapped in a burning nursery," Cale said, his voice flat and unforgiving. "I watched it happen myself. I do not require your interpretation of events I witnessed firsthand." Victor fell silent, unable to argue against a truth the Alpha King had seen with his own eyes. Cale turned his attention to Damon, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. "Tell me about Elena," Cale said, though the deceptive calm in his voice fooled no one present. Damon's jaw tightened. She was my intended mate. I rejected her 2 weeks ago. Her wolf was too weak, her strength insufficient for the responsibilities that would come with standing beside a future alpha. And after this rejection, Cale continued, what arrangements did the pack make to ensure her continued safety and well-being? Silence stretched through the hall. Damon glanced at his father, who offered no assistance, clearly unwilling to claim responsibility for whatever answer might follow. She was relocated to the outer cabins, Damon finally admitted. Standard practice for rejected Omegas. Standard practice, Cale repeated slowly. That leaves a member of your pack without regular food deliveries, without firewood, without any of the basic protections every wolf under your care is entitled to, regardless of rank. He rose from the chair, his presence filling the damaged hall with an authority that made even Victor take an involuntary step back. I have toured dozens of packs in my years as Alpha King. I have seen cruelty before, but I have rarely seen a pack so willing to discard one of its own for the crime of being born without exceptional strength. She survived, Damon said, a note of defensiveness creeping into his voice. She is stronger than any of us gave her credit for, clearly. She ran into a collapsing building to save a child that your entire guard force had abandoned, Cale said, his voice rising for the first time, sharp enough to make the walls seem to tremble. She did this while burned, while breathing smoke that should have killed her, while carrying injuries that would have stopped most trained warriors in their tracks. And she did it after your pack rejected her, humiliated her in front of everyone she had ever known, and left her to fend for herself with nothing. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle over the room. You did not simply misjudge her strength, Damon. You misjudged her entirely. Damon said nothing, his gaze dropping to the floor for the first time since the meeting began. Cale addressed Victor directly. As Alpha King, I hold the authority to review and overturn decisions made within any pack under my crown, when those decisions endanger the well-being of pack members. I am invoking that authority now. Elena's rejection, and the subsequent treatment she received, will be formally reviewed by my council upon our return to the capital. Until that review concludes, you will provide full support and protection to her, regardless of her current rank. Victor nodded quickly, clearly eager to avoid further scrutiny from a king already displeased with his leadership. Of course, Alpha King. Whatever you require. I also require a full report on the cause of this fire, Cale continued. A faulty lantern left unattended is not an acceptable explanation for a disaster of this scale. I want to know why safety protocols within your nursery den were so inadequate that a single mistake nearly cost the lives of every pup inside. The meeting continued for another hour, Cale systematically dismantling every excuse Victor and his guards offered, extracting a genuine accounting of the failures that had led to the fire and the chaotic response that followed. By the time he finally left the hall, the Ashwood pack understood, in no uncertain terms, that the Alpha King's inspection had revealed far more weakness than they had hoped to hide. Outside, the midday sun illuminated the scorched remains of the nursery den, workers already beginning the slow process of clearing debris and planning reconstruction. Cale walked past them toward the tent where Elena still rested, his mind heavy with everything he had learned about the pack that had so carelessly discarded his mate. He found her awake when he entered, sitting up slightly against a stack of cushions, the pup Finn nestled contentedly in her lap, while she carefully avoided jostling her bandaged arms. She looked up as he entered, and something in her expression, a mixture of wariness and cautious curiosity, told him she had already begun processing the strangeness of her situation. The healers say I should thank you, Elena said, her voice still rough, but stronger than it had been that morning. For finding me, for bringing your healers to treat me. You do not need to thank me for that, Cale replied, settling into the chair beside her cot, careful to give her space despite every instinct urging him closer. Anyone in my position would have done the same. I doubt that, Elena said, a flicker of something dry and knowing crossing her features despite her exhaustion. Most alphas I have known would not have troubled themselves over an Omega from the outer cabins. Cale studied her for a long moment, weighing how much to share, remembering Grace's advice about patience and trust. I am not most alphas, he said simply, and you are not simply an Omega from the outer cabins. Last night, you were the only person in this entire pack brave enough to run toward danger, instead of away from it. Elena's cheeks flushed slightly, clearly uncomfortable with praise she had not expected to receive. She looked down at Finn, who had fallen back asleep in her lap, his small chest rising and falling peacefully. "He would have died if I had hesitated even a moment longer," she said quietly. "I could not simply stand there and let that happen, no matter what anyone else decided to do." "That is precisely what makes you remarkable," Cale said. "Courage that costs nothing is easy to find. Courage that risks everything, especially from someone who has already lost so much, is far rarer." Elena glanced up at him, something guarded in her expression softening slightly under the weight of his sincerity. "You speak as though you already know my whole story." "I know enough," Cale admitted. "I know you were rejected. I know your pack failed to support you afterward. I intend to see that corrected, formally, when we return to the capital." Elena's expression shifted into something more complicated, surprise mixed with a wariness that suggested years of learning not to trust promises made by powerful people. Why would the Alpha King concern himself with something so small as one Omega's rejection? Cale held her gaze steadily, choosing his next words with care. "Because it is not small to me," he said. "And because there are things about last night I believe you deserve to understand, when you are ready to hear them." Elena studied him for a long moment, clearly sensing there was more beneath his words than he was currently willing to explain. But exhaustion tugged at her, her body still demanding rest to properly heal, and she did not press further, simply nodding slowly, before her eyes began to drift closed once more. Cale remained beside her as she slept, watching the steady rise and fall of her breathing, already planning the careful, patient path that lay ahead. He would give her the time Grace had advised. He would let her heal, let her rebuild the trust that her pack had so thoroughly shattered. But he would not leave her to face any of it alone. Not now. Not ever again. Outside the tent, the sounds of Ashwood's slow recovery continued, hammers striking wood as reconstruction began, guards finally organized under proper leadership, a pack forced to reckon with its own failures, under the watchful eye of a king who had arrived expecting weakness, and found, instead, an unexpected and undeniable truth about where true strength actually resided. 3 days passed before Elena felt strong enough to leave the tent for short walks around the pack grounds. Grace insisted on accompanying her at first, watchful for any sign of dizziness or strain, but by the 4th day, Elena had regained enough strength to venture out alone, Finn trotting along beside her in his small wolf form, having grown attached to her presence in a way that made the healers smile whenever they noticed it. The pack grounds looked different than she remembered from before the fire, though the physical destruction was not the only change. Guards who had once looked through her as though she were invisible now offered polite nods when she passed. A few pack members even stopped to thank her directly, their gratitude awkward but sincere, clearly still adjusting to the idea that the quiet Omega they had ignored for years had turned out to be braver than most of them combined. Elena found the attention uncomfortable in ways she struggled to articulate. For years, invisibility had felt like a kind of protection, a way to avoid further disappointment or cruelty. This sudden visibility, even when wrapped in gratitude, left her feeling exposed in a manner she was not yet certain how to navigate. She often found herself seeking out Cale during these walks, drawn by a pull she did not fully understand, but had stopped trying to resist. He seemed to sense her presence before she even spoke, always turning toward her with an expression that held none of the careful indifference most alphas reserved for those below their rank. "You are walking farther each day," he observed one afternoon, falling into step beside her as she made her way toward the stream at the edge of the territory, the same stream she had once visited each morning during her exile in the outer cabins. "Grace tells me your lungs have nearly fully recovered." "I feel stronger," Elena admitted, glancing at him sideways, "though I suspect your healers deserve most of the credit for that." "They are skilled," Cale agreed, "but healing also requires the will to recover, and that is something no herb or salve can provide. That part has been entirely your own doing." Elena said nothing for a moment, watching Finn dart ahead of them, chasing something small and quick through the underbrush. She had spent the past 3 days turning over the mystery of Cale's continued presence, his insistence on personally overseeing her recovery, despite surely having more pressing matters as Alpha King. She had asked Grace about it once, only to receive a knowing smile, and a suggestion that some questions were better answered by the person directly involved. You still have not told me, Elena said finally, why you have taken such a personal interest in my recovery. Surely the Alpha King has more important concerns than one Omega's healing. Kale was quiet for a long moment, and Elena watched something shift across his features, a careful weighing of words she was beginning to recognize as characteristic of him. He rarely spoke without consideration, a trait so different from Damon's careless certainty that she found herself appreciating it more with each passing day. There is something I have been waiting to tell you, Kale said finally, coming to a stop beside the stream, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the water. I wanted to give you time to heal, time to trust your own judgment again, before adding anything more complicated to what you have already survived, but I do not think it is fair to you to keep withholding it any longer. Elena's heart began to beat faster, some instinct warning her that whatever came next would change everything. Tell me, she said simply. When I found you in the grass that night, Kale began, when I checked for your pulse, and my hand touched your wrist, I felt something I had not felt in decades of searching. A recognition, absolute and undeniable. He paused, studying her face carefully for any reaction. You are my mate, Elena. My wolf recognized you the moment I touched you. The words hung in the air between them, and Elena felt the ground seem to shift beneath her feet, though she remained perfectly still. She had heard of true mate bonds, the rare and powerful connection that some wolves were fortunate enough to find, but she had never expected such a thing might apply to her, not after Damon's rejection had already convinced her that she was simply not meant for that kind of bond. That is not possible, she said, though the words came out less certain than she intended. I already had a mate. Damon rejected me, but the bond. A rejected bond breaks completely, Kale interrupted gently. It does not prevent a true mate bond from forming afterward. What you experienced with Damon was never a true bond to begin with, Elena. If it had been, rejection would have caused far greater damage to both of you than what you described to Grace. Elena absorbed this slowly, memories shifting into new configurations as she considered his words. She had always sensed, somewhere deep down, that her connection to Damon had felt more like obligation than the profound bond she had heard others describe. She had told herself this was simply the nature of pack-arranged mate pairings, that not every bond needed to feel like the stories she had grown up hearing. Why are you telling me this now? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Because you deserve the truth, Kale said, and because I refuse to build anything between us, on secrets or half-explanations. I am telling you because I want you to understand that whatever happens next, whatever choice you make, I will respect it. I know you have been through more than enough upheaval for one lifetime. I am not asking you to accept this bond simply because it exists. I am only asking you to know the truth and to decide for yourself what you want to do with it. Elena stared at him, searching his expression for any sign of the manipulation or careless certainty she had come to expect from powerful men in positions like his. She found none, only patience, and something else beneath it, something that looked remarkably like hope, carefully guarded against disappointment. I do not know what I want, she admitted honestly. Everything has happened so quickly. 2 weeks ago I believed my entire future had been decided for me, and I was preparing to accept a life alone in those outer cabins. Now you are telling me I am mated to the Alpha King of every pack in this region, and I do not even know how to begin processing that. You do not need to decide anything today, Kale said gently. Take whatever time you need. I only wanted you to have the truth, so that whatever you choose it with full understanding of what stands before you. Elena nodded slowly, grateful for the space he offered, even as her mind raced with the implications of what he had shared. They stood together by the stream in comfortable silence for a while longer, watching Finn splash playfully at the water's edge, both lost in their own thoughts about the strange, unexpected path fate had carved for them both. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and purple, Elena found herself studying Kale's profile, the strong lines of his face softened by the fading light. She thought of everything he had done since finding her, the patience, the genuine concern that seemed to have nothing to do with pack politics or obligation. She thought of how different he was from Damon, who had never once looked at her the way Kale did now, as though her presence itself was something precious rather than simply expected. She was not ready to name what she felt, not yet, not after everything her heart had already survived in recent weeks. But for the first time since her rejection, she felt something that was not quite hope, but stood close enough to it, that she no longer feared the feeling entirely. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for telling me the truth, and for giving me time to understand it." Cale turned to look at her, something warm and genuine in his expression. "You will always have my honesty, Elena, and you will always have whatever time you need. That much I can promise you, regardless of what you eventually decide." They walked back toward the pack grounds as darkness settled over the territory, Finn trotting contentedly between them, and Elena found herself, for the first time in longer than she could remember, looking forward to whatever the next day might bring, rather than simply enduring it. Word of the mate bond spread through Ashwood territory within days, despite Cale's efforts to keep the matter private until Elena had time to fully process what it meant for her. Pack members who had already begun treating her with newfound respect after the fire now regarded her with something closer to astonishment, whispering about the rejected Omega who had somehow captured the attention of the most powerful Alpha in the region. Elena found the attention exhausting in a different way than before. Where once she had been invisible, now she felt watched constantly, every movement scrutinized by pack members, trying to determine how they should behave toward someone who might soon hold a position of tremendous influence. She retreated more often to the quiet of the stream, or to the small garden Grace had shown her near the healers' tents, seeking moments of peace amid the sudden upheaval of her circumstances. It was during one such retreat, nearly a week after Cale's revelation, that Damon finally approached her directly, for the first time since her rejection. Elena sat on a flat stone near the stream, Finn curled asleep beside her, when she heard footsteps approaching through the underbrush. She looked up to find Damon standing several feet away, his expression a complicated mixture of discomfort and something that might have been genuine remorse, though Elena had learned enough in recent weeks to be cautious about trusting first impressions. "May I speak with you?" Damon asked, his voice lacking the careless confidence she remembered from the Great Hall. Elena considered refusing, considered simply rising and walking away without acknowledging him at all. But curiosity, and a desire to finally close this particular chapter of her life properly, kept her seated. "You may speak. I cannot promise I will have much to say in response." Damon nodded, seeming to accept this as fair. He remained standing, keeping a respectful distance, his hands clasped behind his back, in a posture that reminded her, uncomfortably, of the formal way he had once addressed pack elders, rather than the easy familiarity he had shown her during their years together before the rejection. "I owe you an apology," he began. "Not simply for the rejection itself, though I have come to understand how poorly I handled that. I owe you an apology for everything that followed, for allowing the pack to abandon you in the outer cabins without support, for never once checking whether you were safe or cared for after I ended our bond." Elena studied him carefully, searching for the sincerity beneath his words. Why the sudden change of heart? Is it because the Alpha King has made his displeasure with Ashwood's treatment of me abundantly clear? Or is this apology born from something more genuine? Damon flinched slightly at the directness of her question, but did not look away. "Both, if I am honest with you. The Alpha King's words during our meeting forced me to confront things about my own behavior that I had been avoiding. But watching you run into that burning building, hearing how you saved Finn without a moment's hesitation, made me realize how wrong I was about you from the very beginning." "You rejected me because you believed my wolf was weak," Elena said, her voice steady, despite the old hurt that still lingered beneath the words. "You humiliated me in front of the entire pack, because you decided I was not strong enough to stand beside a future Alpha." "I know," Damon said quietly. "And I was wrong. Strength is not only measured by how fiercely a wolf can shift, or how loudly they can command a room. You proved that more clearly than anyone I have ever known." He paused, something genuinely regretful crossing his features. "I do not expect you to forgive me, Elena. I only wanted you to know that I understand now how much damage my careless cruelty caused, and that I am sorry for every moment of suffering it brought you." Elena considered his words for a long moment, weighing them against everything she had endured in the weeks since her rejection. She thought of the cold nights alone in the outer cabins, the hunger she had learned to ignore, the crushing loneliness that had nearly broken something essential inside her, before she found the strength to keep moving forward regardless. "I do not forgive you," she said finally, honestly. "Not yet, and perhaps not for a long while still. What you did caused real harm. Harm that cannot simply be erased by an apology, however sincere it might be. She paused, watching his expression carefully. But I also do not wish to carry this anger with me indefinitely. I have a new life ahead of me now, one I never expected, and I would rather spend my energy building that than dwelling on what happened here. Damon nodded slowly, accepting this without argument. That is more grace than I deserve. Thank you for hearing me out, regardless. There is one thing I would ask of you, Elena said, as Damon turned to leave. He paused, looking back at her with an expression that suggested he would grant whatever she requested, if it lay within his power. Ensure that no other Omega in this pack is ever treated the way I was. Whatever changes the Alpha King's council implements, make certain your pack actually follows through on them, long after his attention has moved elsewhere. I promise you that, Damon said, and something in his voice convinced Elena he meant it genuinely. I will not allow what happened to you to happen to anyone else under my future leadership. He left her alone by the stream, and Elena sat for a long while afterward, processing the strange sense of closure the conversation had provided. She had not expected forgiveness to come easily, had not expected it to come at all so soon after everything that had happened. But she found, sitting there in the quiet afternoon light, with Finn stirring awake beside her, that she felt lighter somehow, as though setting down a portion of the weight she had been carrying since the Great Hall. That evening, she found Cale reviewing reports from his warriors near the temporary quarters he had established during the extended stay in Ashwood territory. He looked up as she approached, his expression warming immediately, in a way that still surprised her with its consistency, day after day, regardless of his mood or the burdens of his position. You look thoughtful, he observed, setting aside the reports and giving her his full attention. Damon spoke with me today, Elena said, settling onto the bench beside him. He apologized. Cale's expression sharpened slightly, though he kept his voice carefully neutral. How do you feel about that? Elena considered the question seriously before answering. Surprised, I think. I did not expect it to feel like anything significant, but it did, somehow. Not forgiveness, not yet, but perhaps the beginning of something that might eventually lead there. You do not owe him forgiveness on any timeline but your own, Cale said firmly. Whatever peace you find with what happened, find it in whatever way feels true to you, not because circumstances or other people's expectations demand it. Elena smiled slightly, appreciating the sentiment more than she could easily express. You have said similar things about the bond between us. Take whatever time I need, decide in whatever way feels true. Is that simply how you approach everything? Cale considered this for a moment, something thoughtful in his expression. I have watched too many bonds, and too many decisions, made under pressure or obligation, rather than genuine choice. I have seen the damage that causes, both to individuals and to entire packs. I would rather build something real with you, Elena, even if it takes considerably longer, than rush toward something that crumbles the moment real pressure tests it. Elena studied him, this powerful Alpha King who had every right to simply claim the bond and expect her compliance, and yet had chosen instead to offer patience and genuine respect at every turn. She thought of Damon's careless certainty, the way he had never once asked what she wanted or needed, and the contrast struck her more powerfully than it ever had before. I think, she said slowly, testing the words as she spoke them, that I am beginning to understand why my wolf recognized yours so completely, even before either of us fully understood what was happening. Cale's eyes met hers, something hopeful and careful in his expression. And what have you come to understand? That true strength, Elena said, looks a great deal more like patience and genuine care than it ever looked like Damon's careless confidence. I am beginning to see that clearly now, perhaps for the first time in my life. They sat together as the evening settled over the pack grounds, the sounds of Ashwood's continuing recovery fading into the background, and Elena felt, for the first time since her rejection, something that felt remarkably like the beginning of genuine hope for whatever future lay ahead. 2 weeks after the fire, Cale announced that his convoy would soon depart Ashwood territory, to return to the capital, where the formal council review of Elena's treatment would take place. The news sent a fresh wave of anxiety through Elena, who had grown accustomed to the quiet rhythm of her recovery in familiar surroundings, even surrounded by the recent chaos and transformation of her circumstances. You do not have to come with us if you are not ready, Cale told her gently, as they walked together through the newly rebuilt section of the nursery den, workers still finishing the final repairs to the roof that had collapsed weeks earlier. I can arrange for you to remain here, or anywhere else you might prefer, until you feel prepared to make that journey. Elena considered his offer seriously, weighing her options with the same careful deliberation she had applied to every decision since her rejection. She thought of the outer cabins, of the quiet solitude she had once found comfort in, and recognized that returning to that isolated life no longer held any appeal for her. She thought of the capital, of everything unknown that awaited her there, and found that uncertainty felt less frightening than it once might have. "I want to come with you," she said finally. "I have spent enough time hiding from difficult things. I would rather face whatever comes next directly, even if I do not yet fully understand what that means." Cale's expression warmed with something like pride, though he said nothing further about it, simply nodding and beginning to arrange the practical details of her journey alongside his convoy. Grace insisted on accompanying them as well, wanting to ensure Elena's continued recovery remained properly monitored during the travel. And Finn, now old enough to shift briefly into his small pup form on his own initiative, refused to be separated from Elena at all, curling up in her lap during the long carriage rides that carried them away from Ashwood territory. The journey to the capital took nearly a week, winding through varied landscapes that Elena had never seen before, forests giving way to rolling hills, and eventually, the impressive walls of the capital city itself, larger and more elaborate than anything Ashwood territory had prepared her to expect. Cale pointed out landmarks along the way, sharing stories of the different packs they passed, and Elena found herself increasingly comfortable in his presence, the careful distance of their early interactions gradually softening into something more natural and easy. Upon arrival, Elena was given quarters within the royal residence itself, spacious rooms that made the outer cabins in Ashwood feel like a distant, almost unbelievable memory. She struggled at first with the abundance surrounding her, unused to servants offering assistance she had learned to provide for herself, unused to the sheer scale of everything within the capital's walls. "It will take time to adjust," Cale told her during one of their evening walks through the royal gardens, a habit they had continued from Ashwood, both finding comfort in the quiet routine it provided amid so much change. "I do not expect you to feel at home here immediately. Everything feels so different," Elena admitted. 2 months ago I was gathering firewood alone in the forest, uncertain whether anyone would notice if I simply disappeared. Now I am walking through royal gardens with the Alpha King, preparing for a formal council review of my own rejection. I am not certain I fully understand how my life became this." Cale was quiet for a moment, considering his response carefully as he often did. Sometimes the most difficult moments in our lives end up leading us toward things we never could have imagined possible. That does not make the difficulty any less real, or any less painful, while we are living through it. But perhaps it offers some comfort, looking back, to recognize that even our darkest moments were not without purpose. Elena thought about this as they continued walking, the fragrant blooms of the garden releasing their scent into the evening air around them. She thought of the great hall, of Damon's rejection echoing across the stone floor, of the crushing loneliness that had followed. She thought of the fire, of the desperate scramble to save Finn, of collapsing in the grass believing she might die alone and forgotten. And she thought of everything that had followed since, the unexpected discovery of a bond she never anticipated, the patient kindness Cale had shown her at every turn, the growing sense that perhaps her life was only just beginning, rather than having ended in that great hall weeks earlier. "I think," she said slowly, "that I am starting to understand what you mean." The formal council review took place 3 days after their arrival, held in a grand chamber filled with representatives from packs across the entire region, all gathered to hear testimony regarding Ashwood's treatment of one of its own members. Elena felt nervous standing before such an assembly, but Cale remained close beside her throughout the proceedings, his steady presence offering reassurance even when her voice shook slightly as she recounted the events of her rejection and subsequent isolation. The council listened with grave expressions as she described the humiliation of the Great Hall, the cold nights alone in the outer cabins, the pack's failure to provide even basic support during her exile. Several council members exchanged troubled glances as she continued, clearly disturbed by the pattern of neglect her testimony revealed. When she finished, an elder council member named Owen rose to address the assembly. This testimony reveals troubling gaps in how our packs treat Omega members following rejection. This is not the first such account brought before this council, though it may be among the most severe we have heard. I propose we establish formal protocols requiring every pack under the Crown to provide continued support and protection to rejected members, regardless of rank, with meaningful consequences for packs that fail to comply. The proposal received widespread support from the assembled council, and by the end of the session, new formal protections had been established, protections that would extend not only to Ashwood, but to every pack within Cale's territory, ensuring that no other Omega would face the same neglect Elena had endured. Afterward, as the chamber slowly emptied, Elena remained seated, processing the weight of what had just occurred. Her painful, private experience had become the catalyst for change that would protect countless others she would never meet, wolves whose futures had just shifted in small but meaningful ways because of her willingness to speak honestly about what she had survived. "You did something remarkable today," Cale said, settling into the seat beside her as the chamber finally emptied entirely. "You turned your own pain into protection for others. That takes a particular kind of courage, Elena. Different from running into a burning building, but no less significant." Elena considered his words, feeling something settle within her that had been unsettled since the moment of her rejection. She had spent weeks feeling like a victim of circumstances, entirely beyond her control. First Damon's cruelty, then the fire, then the overwhelming discovery of her bond with Cale. But sitting in that grand chamber, watching the council implement changes because of her testimony, she felt something different entirely. She felt like someone capable of shaping her own future, rather than simply enduring whatever fate decided to hand her. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for giving me the chance to speak, and for believing my testimony mattered enough to bring before the entire council." "Your testimony mattered, because it was true," Cale said simply. "I merely ensured you had the platform to share it properly." They sat together in the quiet, emptied chamber, as evening light filtered through tall windows, and Elena felt, for the first time since arriving in the unfamiliar capital, a genuine sense of belonging beginning to take root, not simply because of her bond with Cale, but because of what she had accomplished entirely on her own, through her own courage and honesty. The path ahead remained uncertain in many ways, the full weight of what a formal bond with the Alpha King might eventually mean, still something she had not fully decided how to navigate. But sitting there in that quiet chamber, Elena found herself increasingly confident that whatever came next, she would face it not as a victim of circumstance, but as someone who had already proven, in the most dramatic circumstances imaginable, exactly how much strength she truly carried within her. Weeks passed in the capital, and Elena found herself settling into a rhythm she never could have anticipated during her lonely nights in the outer cabins of Ashwood. She began working alongside Grace in the healer's quarters, drawn to the meaningful purpose of tending to injured wolves brought in from across the region, her own experience with burns and recovery, giving her a particular empathy for patients facing similar struggles. The work suited her, in ways that surprised even herself. Where the pack politics and formal gatherings of the royal residence often left her feeling out of place, the quiet, focused work of healing felt entirely natural, a continuation of the same instinct that had sent her running into a burning building without hesitation weeks earlier. She found genuine satisfaction in each patient's recovery, each small victory against injury or illness feeling like a personal triumph. Cale visited the healer's quarters often during those weeks, sometimes bringing reports for her to review regarding the new protocols being implemented across various packs, sometimes simply seeking her company during brief pauses in his demanding schedule as Alpha King. Elena had grown to treasure these visits, the easy comfort that had developed between them feeling increasingly natural with each passing day. "The northern packs have all confirmed implementation of the new support protocols," Cale told her one afternoon, finding her in the small garden behind the healer's quarters, where she often took her breaks, Finn napping in a patch of warm sunlight nearby, Ashwood included. "Damon has apparently taken the responsibility quite seriously." "That is good to hear," Elena said, setting aside the herbs she had been sorting for the healer's next batch of remedies. "I worried the changes might fade once your attention moved elsewhere. I have ensured regular reviews will continue, regardless of my direct involvement," Cale assured her. "This will not be a temporary fix that fades from memory once the initial urgency passes." Elena smiled. genuinely pleased by his diligence, though she found her attention drawn more to the careful way he had settled beside her, rather than the details of pack administration. Their conversations had grown steadily more personal over the weeks, moving beyond simple updates about protocols and council decisions into deeper territory, shared thoughts about their pasts, their hopes, the strange and unexpected journey that had brought them together. "Can I ask you something?" Elena said, watching Finn stretch and roll over in his sleep nearby. "Of course. Have you ever regretted waiting so long to find a mate? You mentioned once that you had begun to believe your position had somehow cost you that chance." Kale considered the question seriously, as he did with most things she asked him. "I regretted the loneliness of it, certainly. There were years when I watched other alphas find their bonds, and wondered if something was fundamentally wrong with me, some flaw that made me unsuitable for that kind of connection." He paused, glancing at her with an expression that held nothing but sincerity. "But I do not regret the timing now, knowing it led me to you. Perhaps everything simply needed to align exactly as it did, difficult as that waiting sometimes felt." Elena felt warmth spreading through her chest at his words, an emotion she had grown increasingly comfortable identifying over recent weeks as something far deeper than simple gratitude or friendship. She had spent so long believing herself unworthy of genuine affection, conditioned by years with Damon to expect careless indifference rather than the patient, genuine care Kale offered so consistently. "I think," she said slowly, choosing her words with care, "that I am ready to accept the bond between us. Formally, I mean, not simply as something my wolf recognizes, but as something I choose deliberately, with full understanding of everything it means." Kale went very still beside her, his eyes searching her face for any sign of hesitation or uncertainty. "Elena, you do not need to rush this decision simply because time has passed since I first told you about the bond. I meant it when I said I would wait however long you needed." "I know you meant it," Elena said, reaching out to take his hand, the first time she had initiated such contact between them since arriving in the capital. "And that patience is precisely why I feel ready now. You never once pressured me, never once made me feel obligated to choose this path, simply because circumstances had connected us. You gave me the space to discover, entirely on my own terms, exactly what I wanted." She met his eyes steadily. "And what I want, Kale, is you. Not because my wolf recognized yours in that field, though that recognition certainly mattered, but because every single day since then, you have shown me exactly the kind of partner and mate I never believed I deserved to find." Kale's expression transformed with an emotion so raw and genuine that Elena felt her own eyes beginning to sting with unexpected tears. He raised her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss against her knuckles, a gesture so careful and reverent it made her breath catch in her throat. "You have no idea," he said quietly, "how long I have hoped to hear you say those words, not because I expected them, or felt entitled to them, but because every day spent alongside you has only deepened my certainty that you are precisely the partner I needed, in every sense that matters." They sat together in comfortable silence for a long moment, the weight of the decision settling between them, not as something heavy or overwhelming, but as something that felt entirely right, a natural conclusion to the journey they had shared since that terrible night of fire and unexpected discovery. "There is something else I want to ask you," Elena said eventually, breaking the peaceful silence. "When we formalize this bond, I do not wish to do so quietly, hidden away from public knowledge, the way so much of pack politics seems to prefer. I want Ashwood to know, clearly and publicly, that the Omega they rejected found her place as Luna beside the Alpha King, not out of vengeance, but because I believe it matters, for every other Omega in every pack across this region, to see that rejection does not determine someone's ultimate worth or future." Kale's expression filled with fierce pride at her words. "I could not agree more. I intend to make our bond as public and celebrated as any formal pairing this region has ever witnessed. You deserve nothing less than complete recognition for everything you have overcome and everything you continue to accomplish." They began planning together in the weeks that followed, discussing the formal ceremony that would announce their bond publicly to every pack under Kale's crown, including a planned visit back to Ashwood territory itself, where Elena had requested the ceremony take place, wanting the very hall where she had once been humiliated to become the site of her triumphant return. Grace, upon hearing the news, embraced Elena warmly, tears of genuine happiness in her eyes. "I have watched many bonds form over my years serving the royal family," she said, "but I have rarely witnessed one built with such careful patience and genuine mutual respect. You two have created something truly worth celebrating." Finn, sensing the shift in energy around him even without understanding the specifics, had taken to following Elena even more closely than before, curling against her feet whenever she sat still long enough to allow it. Elena had grown deeply attached to the small pup she had saved, and Kale had already begun discussing formal arrangements to ensure Finn remained close to her, understanding how significant their bond had become since that terrible night in the burning nursery. As preparations continued, Elena found herself reflecting often on the distance she had traveled since her rejection, both literally and emotionally. The frightened, humiliated Omega, who had collapsed on the Great Hall floor, felt like a distant memory now, replaced by someone who had discovered, through fire and loss and unexpected love, exactly how much strength and worth she had always carried within herself, waiting only for the right circumstances to reveal it fully. The formal ceremony was scheduled for the following month, timed to coincide with the full reconstruction of Ashwood's nursery den, allowing Elena's triumphant return to align symbolically with the very structure she had risked everything to protect. As the date approached, Elena felt a growing sense of anticipation rather than the anxiety that might once have accompanied such a significant change in her life. She was ready, fully and completely, to claim the future she had never dared imagine possible, standing beside a mate who had shown her, patiently and consistently, exactly what genuine love and respect looked like. The Great Hall of Ashwood looked nothing like it had on the night of Elena's rejection. Fresh flowers lined every wall, their fragrant blooms filling the air with sweetness that replaced the memory of smoke and humiliation Elena had once associated with this very room. Golden light streamed through newly repaired windows, illuminating a space that had been carefully restored, not just structurally, but in spirit, transformed from a place of painful memory into one ready to host a celebration years in the making. Elena stood in a private chamber adjoining the hall, Grace fussing gently with the final details of her gown, a deep blue fabric that seemed to shift and shimmer like moonlight on water with every small movement. Finn, now fully grown into a healthy young pup, capable of trotting confidently on his own four legs, sat patiently nearby, having been given the honor of walking beside Elena during the ceremony, as a symbol of the very act that had brought her and Kale together. "You look radiant," Grace said, stepping back to admire her work with visible pride, "though I suspect that has less to do with the gown, and more to do with how thoroughly you have transformed since I first met you, burned and barely conscious in that tent." Elena smiled, studying her own reflection in the mirror, hardly recognizing the confident woman looking back at her, compared to the broken figure who had once stumbled out of this very hall in disgrace. The scars from her burns remained, faint lines along her arms that would never fully fade, but she had come to view them not as marks of weakness, but as evidence of exactly what she was capable of when it truly mattered. "Thank you," Elena said, "for everything you have done these past months, for your patience, your wisdom, and honestly, for believing in me even before I fully believed in myself." Grace squeezed her hand warmly. "It has been my genuine privilege, Elena. Now, are you ready? The entire assembly awaits." Elena took a steadying breath, feeling the familiar flutter of nerves mixed with something far stronger, a genuine excitement for the future stretching ahead of her. She thought of everything that had led to this moment, the rejection, the fire, the desperate scramble to save a life that was not her own, the unexpected discovery of a bond that had transformed her entire existence. "I am ready," she said, and meant it completely. The doors to the great hall opened, and Elena stepped through them, with Finn trotting proudly at her side, greeted by the sight of every seat filled with representatives from packs across the entire region, gathered to witness the formal joining of the Alpha King and the Omega who had captured his heart through an act of extraordinary courage. Kale stood at the front of the hall near the same platform where Damon had once declared her rejection, though the space had been transformed with flowing fabric and flowers, bearing no resemblance to that painful memory. He wore formal attire that emphasized his commanding presence, but his eyes held nothing but warmth and open affection as he watched her walk toward him, the assembled crowd rising respectfully as she passed. Elena searched the crowd briefly as she walked, finding Damon seated among the Ashwood representatives, his expression genuinely joyful rather than resentful, a sign of how thoroughly he had grown since their conversation by the stream months earlier. Victor sat beside him, having overseen the successful implementation of every protocol the council had established. Ashwood territory now recognized as a model for how packs should properly support their Omega members. She reached the platform and took Cale's outstretched hand, feeling the familiar warmth and steadiness that had become such a constant comfort throughout their journey together. The presiding elder, Owen, stepped forward to begin the formal ceremony, his voice carrying clearly through the silent, attentive hall. "We gather today to witness a bond forged not through arrangement or obligation, but through genuine recognition and earned trust," Owen began. "This bond stands as testament to a simple truth this council has come to embrace more fully in recent months, that true strength cannot be measured by rank or shift alone, but by the courage of one's heart and the depth of one's compassion." He turned to address the crowd more broadly. "Many of you know the story that brought Elena and Cale together, an Omega, rejected by this very pack, who ran into a burning building to save a child everyone else had abandoned. A king who recognized in that single act of selflessness the mate he had waited decades to find. Their bond represents everything this council now strives to protect, the understanding that every member of every pack, regardless of rank, carries worth and potential that deserves recognition and respect." Elena felt tears gathering in her eyes as Owen spoke, the formal recognition of her journey carrying a weight that settled somewhere deep in her chest, healing wounds that had lingered since that terrible night of rejection. Cale squeezed her hand gently, his own eyes bright with matching emotion as Owen continued through the formal words of the bonding ceremony. When it came time for their formal vows, Cale turned to face her fully, his expression carrying none of the practiced formality one might expect from such a significant royal occasion, only genuine and unguarded love. "Elena," he said, his voice carrying clearly through the silent hall, "I promise to honor the courage and strength you have shown me every single day since I found you in that field. I promise to offer you the patience and respect you deserve, always, in every circumstance we face together. And I promise that you will never again feel invisible, forgotten, or unworthy, not while I have breath remaining in my body." Elena felt her voice waver slightly as she offered her own vows in return. "Cale, I promise to bring the same courage I found in that burning nursery to everything we build together. I promise to trust you, as you have trusted me, with patience and honesty above all else. And I promise that whatever challenges we face, I will meet them standing beside you, not because obligation demands it, but because I choose you, fully and completely, every single day." The formal exchange of the bonding mark followed, a gentle and respectful gesture, completely unlike the violent rejection Elena had once experienced in this same hall. As Cale's mark settled against her skin, Elena felt the bond between them solidify fully, a warmth spreading through her chest that felt like coming home to a place she had never known existed until now. The hall erupted in celebration as the ceremony concluded, pack representatives rising to their feet in genuine applause, the sound filling the space that had once echoed with her humiliation, now resonating instead with joy and celebration. Finn barked happily at their feet, sensing the celebratory energy even without understanding its full significance. Later that evening, as the formal celebration continued, with feasting and dancing throughout the rebuilt hall, Elena found a quiet moment alone, with Cale, near the same window where she had once stood, contemplating her uncertain future in the aftermath of her rejection. "Do you remember," she asked softly, "standing here and telling me the pack no longer had a place for me?" Cale's expression softened with understanding. "I remember everything about that night, though I only learned of it after the fact. I am sorry you carried that pain, even briefly." "I do not regret it," Elena said, surprising herself with the honesty of the statement. "Every difficult moment led me here, to you, to this life I never could have imagined possible. I would not change any of it, painful as it was to survive." Cale pulled her gently into his arms, and Elena rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heartbeat, a sound that had become as familiar and comforting to her as her own breathing. Outside the window, stars scattered across the clear night sky, the same stars that had once watched her collapse alone in the grass, now bearing witness instead to the beginning of a future built on genuine love, mutual respect, and hard-earned strength. "I love you," Cale murmured against her hair, Not because fate decided we should be bonded, but because you have shown me, every single day, exactly why that bond makes perfect sense. I love you too, Elena replied, feeling the words settle into her chest, with a certainty she had never expected to feel again, after Damon's rejection had shattered her confidence so completely. And I am grateful, more than I can properly express, that a single act of courage led me toward this life, instead of the lonely one I once believed was all I deserved. They remained there together by the window, watching the stars and listening to the celebration continuing behind them. Two people who had found something rare and precious in the aftermath of tragedy, ready now to build a future together, grounded in everything true strength actually meant: courage, patience, genuine compassion, and the unwavering choice to show up for each other, every single day, regardless of whatever challenges still lay ahead. The Omega, once rejected and forgotten, had become the Luna of the entire region, not through the whims of fate alone, but through her own extraordinary courage, and the future stretching before her and Kale together promised to be everything she had once believed impossible, filled with genuine love, mutual respect, and the deep, unshakable strength that had been within her all along, simply waiting for the right moment to be fully seen.